Cybersecurity is about more than just technology. It's about how people behave with emails, data, and cloud applications that directly impacts your company's security posture. Security works best when it's ingrained in the culture of your organization. To learn how to build a security culture and transform your employees from targets into a strong line of defense, head to securityweekly.com/proofpoint and visit their Cybersecurity Awareness Center. Every 11 seconds, there's a new ransomware attack. Oil pipelines, universities, corporations, all paying millions of dollars. Barracuda says, don't pay the ransom. Before a ransomware attack occurs, train your teams to recognize an attack and use anti-phishing technology. Protect your applications and they can't get onto your network. Simple backup and restore solutions quickly recover your data without paying the ransom. Build your ransomware protection plan now by visiting securityweekly.com/barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/barracuda. Let's face it, cyber attackers have the advantage. Extra Hop is on a mission to help you take it back. Regain the upper hand with security that can't be undermined, outsmarted, or compromised. When you don't have to choose between protecting your business and moving it forward, that's security uncompromised. See how it works in the full product demo, free online at securityweekly.com/extra hop.
To Business Security Weekly, I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Jason Albuquerque and Ben Carr. InfoSec World 2021 is proud to announce its keynote lineup for this year's event. Hear from Robert Herjavec, plus heads of security at the NFL, TikTok, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Stanford University, and more. Plus, Security Weekly listeners save 20% on Digital Pass registration. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2021 to register now. Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person this December 5th through 7th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. Keynotes from Melissa Miller, John Strand, Leslie Carhart, and Dave Kennedy. Visit securityweekly.com/unlocked to register for free and check out our rockstar lineup. Gentlemen, articles for this week. I started more on the leadership side this week. These first two articles, I really enjoyed them because, it's in this trying time, I like to pull out articles that really help leaders kind of do an introspective and really try to understand what's going on, not only with them, but with their employees. And so this first article talks about the 10 questions great bosses ask themselves. I gravitated directly to number 10, by the way, which ties into the second article. But before we go to number 10, thoughts on the other 9?
Yeah, well, I mean, I started reading the article and I'm like, Matt picked this for me because General Mattis was in the beginning, the beginning statement, right? So it's kind of funny, being a Marine and seeing an article that another Marine wrote. It's pretty funny that we many times go back to our Marine Corps leadership focus. And one of the things that the author put in there, was actually a statement that came from General Mattis's book called Call Sign Chaos. And it says, if I were to sum up the biggest problem of senior leadership in the information age, it's lack of reflection. And it's kind of funny to read that because Call Sign Chaos is an outstanding book. I've read it a couple of times, to be honest with you. And one of the things I always pull out of that book is a statement that General Mattis says that history builds your own shock absorbers. And I love that because I love to be able to say reflecting on things that have happened allows me to be a little bit more stable in the future, right? So history building my shock absorbers is an awesome statement that I use a lot. But to get to the article, all of these items, I can honestly say, are extremely important for leaders to sit back and reflect upon themselves. And in many instances, over the course of my career, when I'm having one-on-one with peers, one-on-ones with employees, one-on-ones with board of director members, CEOs, CROs, I will always ask for feedback. I'll ask questions like this. Am I communicating effectively to you? Am I losing things in transition, right? What can I be doing better to help serve you? Being in the Marine Corps, that servant leadership style is just natural to me now because, in the military, that's the epitome of leadership, is having that servant-oriented leadership style where where you're in a position now to serve others, right? And there's only one way to really truly get effective, and that's through feedback. And feedback are all 10 of these questions, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting perspective to think, are you spending too much time like trying to figure out like where to go, or are you getting it done, but then I guess being reflective of as you're going down that path to make sure you're aligning with the destination that you want to get to, right? So I resonated a lot with number 3, who I want my team to be. And I think that's really, a thoughtful leader will think back and say, am I actually leading by example? Am I, espousing the things that I want the team to be? And am I looking for mentors and leaders, in my own vision that I see that I want to be like, right? And that's how I think, you brought up that shock absorber. I like to say that, we are the sum of our experiences. And so, you experience those things that aren't resonating, and you decide you don't want to do them either personally or professionally. And hopefully you're gravitating towards those things that are actually enablers and leading you forward. But I think if you're not having those conversations, with those close around you who you can trust, and and your stakeholders, to say, are there things that I need to course correct? Are there things that I could communicate more effectively? Or, how can I, better be a servant towards the eventual goal and what you're looking for? I think those things are super important. If you're not doing that, you're not being an effective leader.
Yeah. It's like, I look at it like you're not keeping score during the game, right? And for me, I have to keep score during the game, because perception can easily become reality. And in many times, maybe just not communicating effectively may create a perception that, a business unit leader or a peer, doesn't think well of you, right? And they think that maybe there was a different motivation behind a decision you made. And being able to quickly identify that, number one, and secondly, fix that perception, because it could have been something extremely genuine on your part that was just, misconstrued or wasn't communicated correctly. But, to be able to fix that on the fly very quickly, the only way you can do that is through communicating and having conversations with many of these questions on the regular.
Through relationships, right, Jason? Because if you think about a lot of the ways that we've gotten to communicate, it's, it was email, now it's text. And I think, we've lost, especially, it's hard to maintain that in a remote work environment. I think it's really important to try to work on those relationships, because ultimately, like you said, those miscommunications are easily done in an email and super easy to do through a text, right? Because you're being short and terse and to the point, and you don't have that personal interaction that's coaching people on the way in which maybe the intent was behind what you say. So I think that's a really focused point you have to think about.
Yeah, you can't tell emotion through a text message or an email, right?
Yeah,
and
100%.
I don't know how many times over the course of the last couple of years, I'll be sitting at a red light and I'll respond to a text message that I got, and then I'll get home and I'll text the person back and say, I am so sorry I was so quick on that text. I was sitting at a red light and I just wanted to get you an answer fast, right? Like, to me, I'm like, oh my God, how did they take that? Because I was just so curt and so fast that now I go back, I'm like, hey, now I have time, let's talk, right? Or something like that. And, because I just don't want things to be perceived, in a bad light, just because time or trying to react quickly, through a text message. But yeah, it's things like that have become my focus to make sure that perception is really where it's supposed to be at.
The last one is around autonomy, and it ties into the second article around forget flexibility. It's all about autonomy. And I put these here together because if I think about how do we build the next leaders? How do we build our teams to take on the next leadership roles? And a lot of this has to do with giving them the freedom, the ability to make decisions and learn from that and continue to grow. And I tie this into this next article because in this hybrid world, for lack of a better term, a lot of people are thinking it's all about flexibility, like on-site, off-site, hybrid, remote, whatever. But autonomy plays a huge part in what employees want, and if you give them those freedoms and you give them the ability to make decisions, they will turn into eventually the next set of leaders. And that's why I focus so hard on these first two articles.
100%. And in Call Sign Chaos, they talk about decentralized leadership, and that's about autonomy of the troops, right? And that's how General Mattis led his teams, was through this decentralized structure that he had. And he was very successful. But you know what he did? He made sure everyone understood the goals. He made sure everyone understood the principles that he lived by. He made sure everyone understood how those goals were related to the mission, right? So, you know, he was is a very good communicator, but while he was in the Marine Corps, a very good communicator in establishing the principles, establishing the goals, establishing what it meant to get the roadmap to those goals. And that created the ability for him to build the relationships and the trust to have that decentralized model, the autonomy within his troops.
There's two sides to that, right, Jason? I mean, you know, I think you highlighted really appropriately, you know, guardrails and objectives, right? What are the guardrails you have to stay in? What are the objectives you're trying to reach? And communicating that effectively to the people you work with, and, you know, ultimately having that effectively communicated to you to understand, you know, what's the risk mission for the CISO to operate on within the company. But then the other piece of that is, I think we need to coach. I mean, people don't natively necessarily understand this in every case. We need to coach those people on, you know, how to develop that rapport and that trust relationship. You know, I think, you know, trust is earned, not necessarily given. We have to let people risk to fail, but at the same time, we have to course correct and bring them back in and explain to them, okay, here's how you violated that guardrail, or here's how you didn't reach the objective. In order to get that trust where I oversee less, how do I get you to the point where you are autonomous, right? How do you build that respect and trust relationship? And
mentorship plays a key part in that, right? And that's where, you know, that leadership structure and creating that mentorship structure is extremely important, because now you have folks who can help guide you through. And that's one thing that General Mattis did really well, is he was, you know, he's a great mentor at the end of the day, right? And he built that within his ranks to become great mentors and leadership mentors. But when things would fail, he would fail fast, right? Fail fast and then pivot.
Right. So we're going to skip ahead to number 3, because I think we beat that horse, but in a great way. I mean, I think the conversation is great, because this is how we're going to build our leadership skills and how we're going to build our next teams. The next one is your business making these risk management mistakes. And we were talking about a little bit of this on the previous segment. We kind of started going down the business resiliency and threat modeling and stuff. And so here we are looking at, you know, from a risk management perspective. And the first one that comes up, and we've talked about this for, I think, the last few weeks on end, there's a couple here that there's some common themes, like organizations that rely on a large collection of best-of-breed solutions often have trouble getting comprehensive visibility into their systems.
Who would have thought? Holy crap. The fanboy statement of the year right there.
Right. Then we followed up with zipping past zero trust, which has also been a big topic on this show over the last few weeks.
And honestly, I think that was my point with the cloud migration, right? We had so many organizations in the previous segment. We had so many organizations who rushed to the cloud to keep their businesses alive. They didn't do some of those core security controls that they needed to, right? So they're migrating to the cloud because the easy button to get them to continue to drive revenue. Well, now guess what? Time to take a look back and zero trust, all of those things we've been talking about for, decade plus, but all of those best practices and really the core security controls that they need to put in play, time to go back and look at that. And email security falls right into that as well. I mean, those are core functions.
If you go back to that first point, Matt, organizations rely on a collection of best of breed solutions. I don't know. I kind of think people should rely on, organizations should rely on best of breed process and people, right? Before you get to solutions like that.
Yeah.
That's part of the failure here, right? Is like, you're thinking about this from a technology mindset, not really from that people mindset and how you actually, get to where you want to go. So this was I guess an interesting article, but it was weird how they approached it. I think the last one, skipping past the incident response plan, that's Man, I see that so often where, you get in an organization or you talk to peers and, they are not planning for the eventuality of an event. And I think not having that ahead of time just puts you in a really bad place, because as a CISO, in my mind, it's inevitable that either, right as you're starting, something major is happening with the release or something with the company. You're planning as the CISO to go on vacation. Inevitably, something's going to happen, and not having a plan for how you address it is just a miserable way to find yourself in that situation.
Yeah.
Yes, which ties into the next article: 3 priorities to support the new hybrid workplace. Again, from a security perspective, right? Now, number one, we kind of know, but man, if security by design were easy, we'd all be doing it, right? And then you throw privacy, trust, and compliance in there at the same time. I mean, come on, guys. Like, really?
Yeah,
you think we can get there?
This article, so the one that tipped me over the edge was a security first culture. If I walked in the door and I looked at my CEO and I said, listen, we need to have a security first culture, he'd look at me and say, no, we need to drive revenue first. Right? I mean, at the end of the day, I get it. We want security embedded in our culture. We want it to be part of the fabric of our culture. But in no way, shape, or form am I going to walk up to a chairman of a board of directors or a CEO of an organization or a chief revenue officer and say, we need to, and slam my hand on the table and say, we need to have a security first culture. Not going to happen. I'll get laughed out of the room, right? But talking about having ingrained in our culture, that's different.
A pillar.
Having it part of
the
DNA of our culture,
it's got to be a foundational tenet, right? I mean, it's, I've worked for companies before where this has been the case, and I've worked companies before they haven't. But I validate your point. Like, we're here to do business, not to be secure, right?
That's right.
But hopefully what we're here is to do business securely.
100%. 100. So it's a balance, and I looked at that statement. I said, that's not how I would walk in the door and talk to an owner of a company or a chairman of a board of directors. I'm not saying that. Not happening.
Right. But the second point, the one in the middle, security testing, monitoring, response, preparedness, back to your point, Ben, right? Being prepared for the eventual event, because it's going to happen. And if you're not prepared, this is how organizations are going to fail miserably.
Yep.
Well, I think people used to say, like, we're going to figure out how to avoid an event, right? Avoid a breach. And I don't know if that's the best messaging to send out there, right? I mean, if you go to your board and say, we're going to prevent an event, and then it happens, like, you don't look like you're in a really good place, right? Versus going and setting that expectation that, hey, look, we hope we don't have one. We'll do our best. But at the end of the day, like, the measurement and the metric should be on how quick do we recover and how did we handle the event? And was it the least impactful it could be to the organization? Right. And it puts you in so much better place when that potentially happens, right? And even if it doesn't, I think contextually, you're just setting up the right framework for security to work in.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny. You started off, Matt, with a General Mattis article. Now all of a sudden my mind went straight to military mode, and it's ultimately it's train how you fight. You got to build the muscle memory. You have to, otherwise you're going to fail, right? And that's the reason why in the military we practice, test constantly, because you have to build the muscle memory. And if you're in an incident response scenario, you haven't built that muscle memory, you're going to fall on your face.
Yep.
Yeah, and to take it back to your point, I mean, from a military side, I mean, you practice with your unit, but then at some point you have to practice in a multi-unit dimension, right?
100%.
Because if you're out there as infantry and you don't know how to handle when you need artillery support, that's going to be again a bad day for you when the rounds go the wrong way. So
that's
it's
why
important.
every year we'd meet at 29 Palms, California, do combined arms exercises, and we'd have everybody there.
Yeah, right. So I mean, and that same thing should apply in the corporate world, right? Involve legal, involve marketing, involve sales, involve every part of the organization that potentially has some impact level in these exercises. Don't run them just tactically. You need to run them strategically.
That's right.
Back to your cybersecurity culture. Here are 5 tips for building a cybersecurity culture in your organization. I actually like number 1 because it says start in the C-suite and make security relatable. As in, we're not security first, we're revenue first. But how does security help protect revenue and drive the business forward?
That's right. No, 100%. And we talked about it in the last in the last segment. As we were having the conversation, I'm saying there's an example of how security is a business enabler. Here's another example of how security is a business enabler. Think about that. If you're part of the due diligence team acquiring another organization, and as the CISO, you're assessing and having your team assess that organization, you're a business enabler, because now you're going and you're looking at the risk that that company could potentially bring to you, and then working with your leadership team saying, hey, wait a minute, we could be taking on millions of dollars worth of risk here. We need to maybe renegotiate that price or have some level of contractual agreement that's going to be remediated. So I look at that as business enablement right there.
Right. I like the last point here, and we've touched on it, I think, once before. Have a CISO succession plan in place. Because of the tenure of CISOs, like, how do you know who the next person is? And that's partially, and I think you've explained this before, Jason, like, you have people that were kind of, you were grooming to be that next level. 100%. Exactly right. Yeah.
It's a strategy that I ask my staff to always employ within their teams, is always have that succession strategy all the way down the ranks, right? Yeah. Where you have and I call them your lieutenants. We all need to have our lieutenants, because at any point in time, I could, tap my director of security and say, listen, I need you to be sitting in strategic meetings with me side by side for the next week. Well, somebody needs to be taking on what that director was doing on the day-to-day, and that's that lieutenant, right? That lieutenant's going to come in, and that's going to give them on-the-job training on really sitting in those shoes, right? So, for me, it's a necessity within our organization. And then again, that may be just military style coming out all over again, but it's something that I'm extremely passionate about, that we all have to have our lieutenants. We all have to have that person you can trust. At the end of the day, I want to be able to go on vacation myself, right? They want to be able to go on vacation for a week or so, and we need to have those trusted folks that can step in our shoes and do the job.
Yeah, that's just operational organizational maturity, right? You have to get to that point where you're developing that next cadre of people as they come up, and figuring out how to do that, like, I think, like you said, for your team as well as yourself, right? Mm-hmm. And I think putting that in place also shows you're business savvy, and that you're thinking about those terms. We have to figure out how to, I think it's not just about the session plan internally, but like grooming those people who you're mentoring. If it's not within that same organization, how do they move up to that next step, that next career point in another organization, right? And then having somebody that can backfill them. Because if your plan is just your whole team's going to stay there for the next 3 years, that you're going to be there, next 5 years you're going to be there, again, that's not going to happen. That's not reality, right? So somebody's going to take another job. It just behooves you to be able to have that person who can step into that role, and you're functioning and you don't have any downtime.
Yeah. And Matt, I know you've heard me say this before, but for Ben, I always talk to my direct staff, and again, I try to model the way, because I want them to be doing the same thing. I always say my job is to teach you how to put me out of a job, because then I'm off to my next best thing, right? So that's kind of where I've taken my my mentorship is, I'm going to teach you to do my job. You're going to teach your direct reports to do your job. And we're going to give professional development by that mentorship style, and I'm a firm believer in that. And you're able to groom a really, really good bench. And honestly, I almost feel like that's helped me retain folks by having that mentality.
Mm-hmm. Oh, 100%.
They love that kind of culture. They love having that level of mentorship, and they know I'm always going to be there to have their back. And their staff feels the same way about them, because they're there to have their staff's back and teach them and mentor them.
Yep. Yeah. And whenever you're looking at a role, or, somebody's looking at a role for you, I mean, those type of things come up, right? And staff you're trying to hire, they're going to back channel and find out from, your staff what that relationship's like and how you operate. And so I think that's super important to have that relationship there.
Which ties into the last article, 5 cybersecurity personality traits for a successful career. I think I can boil this down to 2 words for Mr. Albuquerque: aptitude and attitude.
Yeah, baby. 100%, right? So it's so funny that you said that, because number 3 says a desire to learn, and underneath it I put, and the aptitude to do so. So you called it, man. You called it.
We've done enough of these shows together. I figured I had that one pegged.
You got it. Attitude and aptitude.
And empathy. I think the last one does play in here a little bit as well, is empathy. I mean, nothing that happens in cybersecurity is easy. And I think empathy is another one, but I had to go to your two, because to me you sum it up so beautifully every time we talk about this topic.
Well, thank you. I'll take that as a compliment, sir.
I have to say that I think empathy is more important than I want to give it credit for, right? Unfortunately, like it would be easy if you didn't have to be empathetic to this, but like a lot of the friction is the empathy for how other parts of the organization are responding to things you're trying to do. And I think, it goes back to that human element. It just goes back to dealing with people, trying to figure out how to operate smoothly. And 10 years ago, 15 years ago, empathy was not on my key list of things, but empathy certainly is, up there at the top now, because if you can do things in an empathetic fashion and understand where people's motivations are coming from, makes your job a whole lot easier.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's one of the bullets underneath attitude, right? I look at customer service attitude. I look at that servant-centric attitude. Empathy is part of that, right? I mean, being able to put yourself in the shoes of a CFO or someone who works in finance or HR and really figure out their motivations and what's making them tick, and then how you can help enable them. That's part of that attitude.
Yep.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you everyone for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security.